The first time the lights flickered in cell 412, it wasn't the electricity that worried the guards, it was the silence that followed. For an inmate at ADX Florence, silence is never just silence. It's a warning, a shift, a crack forming beneath a mind already stretched thin. And if stories like this fascinate you, hit subscribe, because this one only gets darker. The man inside that concrete box was Marcus Hale, a former organized crime enforcer serving a life sentence with no chance of transfer. Before ADX, he could stare down gun barrels without blinking. Inside ADX, he couldn't stare down his own thoughts. His reputation meant nothing against the 23-hour lockdown, the sealed doors, the white noise machines engineered to bury any human trace of life. The place was designed to keep the country safe. What it did to the people inside was another story entirely. On paper, Marcus was stable. No disciplinary issues. No infractions. No signs of aggression since arriving. But the officers on range detail could feel it, the subtle, sharp edge of someone beginning to slip. It always started the same way, long pauses before responding, pacing that stretched into hours, a tightening jaw whenever the food slot opened. ADX wasn't a prison you survived with muscle. It was a prison that studied your mind until it found the fault line. The breakdowns never came suddenly. They unfolded quietly, like slow leaks in a sealed room. One day Marcus stopped shaving. The next day he stopped sleeping. He began hearing things, first indistinct whispers, then voices he swore were coming from inside the pipes. Guards wrote incident reports, but nothing actionable. Just another inmate showing early signs of stress. Stress. As if that word could capture what long-term isolation really carved into a human being. His first real crack happened during a routine morning round. An officer slid the breakfast tray through the slot, and Marcus didn't move. He didn't speak. He didn't even look up. He just stared at the wall, unmoving, as if he'd been unplugged. Only after the guard walked away did Marcus whisper something into the air, barely audible, but caught on the surveillance mic. They finally found the door. That line shook the lieutenant reviewing the footage. Nobody knew what he meant. In ADX, doors don't open. Not metaphorical ones, not psychological ones. But Marcus believed something was opening, and whatever it was, it terrified him more than the solitary confinement ever had. Within 48 hours, he was tearing his mattress apart. Not violently, methodically. He arranged the stuffing along the edges of his cell in patterns the psychologist later described as fractured spatial mapping, the kind seen in inmates developing severe sensory deprivation symptoms. Marcus insisted it was to block the signals. When asked what signals, he shook his head, eyes sunken and frantic. "You don't hear them," he muttered. "But they hear you." The guards chalked it up to classic isolation-induced paranoia. But ADX staff had seen this pattern too many times to ignore it. When an inmate began talking to walls, they were usually weeks, maybe days, from a full mental collapse. Then came the night everything changed. During a late-hour tear check, the officer stopped at Marcus's cell and froze. Marcus was standing dead center, arms at his sides, staring directly into the surveillance camera. Not blinking. Not breathing normally. Just staring, like he'd been waiting. The officer tapped the window. "Marcus? You good?" Marcus leaned slightly closer to the camera, eyes hollow. "They're coming through," he whispered. "You should have sealed it when you had the chance." And before the officer could respond, the lights in the entire tier blinked, twice, then flickered into darkness. In ADX, that should never happen. And the moment the emergency lights kicked on, Marcus Hale was no longer in the center of his cell. He was gone. The alarms rolled through D-tier like a low, metallic earthquake, shaking every bolt in the range. ADX doesn't lose inmates. Not physically, not visually, not for a single second. Yet when the emergency lights stabilized, Marcus Hale wasn't where he had been standing. His cell door was still locked. No breach. No tampering. Just absence. 2 guards rushed in with the extraction team close behind. Protocol required them to assume the worst, a medical collapse, a self-harm attempt, or a hidden ambush point. But when the door slid open, Marcus wasn't on the floor. He wasn't behind the bed. He wasn't under the steel desk. He was crouched in the farthest corner, facing the wall like a man praying to something that wasn't there. His wrists shook uncontrollably. Not from fear, but from exhaustion, like he'd been holding himself together by muscle memory alone. The lieutenant stepped in. "Marcus. Look at me." Marcus didn't move. "He's in the wall," he whispered. "You don't understand. He's been here longer than any of us." To the officers, it sounded like classic isolation-induced hallucination. But the prison psychologist, Dr. Keene, saw something else. This wasn't random paranoia. Marcus's words had structure, chronology. He believed he was responding to someone, or something, specific. 8 minutes later he was escorted, shackled, limp, to the ADX Crisis Intervention Room, a stark cube used for mental health assessments. No restraints, no sharp edges, just bright lights and a table. Marcus blinked rapidly, trying to focus. Sensory overload hit him like a wave. Dr. Keene sat across from him. "Marcus, when did the voices start?" He shook his head slowly. "They're not voices. They're directions." "Directions from who?" He hesitated. "From the ones who already broke." Keene knew exactly what that meant. Every long-term ADX unit had its own folklore, stories passed silently between cells through vents, rumors about inmates who spent years in isolation until their minds buckled in on themselves. Some spiraled into psychosis. Some went mute. Some just stopped responding altogether. ADX didn't publicize those cases. But the inmates felt their presence the way sailors feel the ocean. Keene laid his pen down. "Marcus, tell me what happened when the lights went out." Marcus rubbed his temples until the skin turned white. "It wasn't the lights," he said. "It was the quiet behind them. It shifted. Like someone stepped closer." "Stepped where?" Marcus looked up, eyes wide and bloodshot. "Inside my head." The psychologist documented the symptoms: disassociation, visual misperceptions, auditory distortions. Nothing supernatural. Nothing impossible. Just the effects of prolonged solitary confinement tightening around a human mind until it bent. Still, something didn't add up. Marcus's deterioration had moved faster, much faster, than the typical ADX timeline. Most men cracked over years. Marcus was shifting in months. That suggested an external trigger. A guard knocked on the door, whispering to the lieutenant. A second inmate on the same tier had begun covering his window with toothpaste, another early breakdown marker. A third complained of ticking inside the vents. 3 men sliding at once wasn't coincidence. It was a pattern. Keene lowered his voice. "Marcus, has anyone been talking to you through the pipes?" "Another inmate? A guard?" Marcus laughed, a short, broken sound. "No one living." "Not the way you mean." The lieutenant cut the interview there. To him, Marcus was gone, too far into the psychological spiral. But Keene wasn't convinced. Breakdowns spread in patterns. So did influence. As they escorted Marcus back to his cell, he suddenly stiffened and pulled his head away from the wall. "He's still here," Marcus muttered. "You're all pretending you don't hear it." The guard frowned. "Hear what?" Marcus's voice dropped to a hoarse whisper. "The tapping." The guard froze. He heard it too, 3 faint taps coming from inside the concrete. Not loud. Not threatening. Just deliberate. And for the first time, a staff member realized Marcus might not be hallucinating everything. The tier had a secret. And it wasn't done revealing itself. The tapping didn't stop. It echoed through D-tier like a coded message, soft enough to dismiss, steady enough to demand attention. Guards logged it as possible plumbing anomalies. Maintenance disagreed. Psych staff blamed shared delusion. But the sound kept returning, 3 taps, a pause, 3 taps again, always in the same rhythm, always in the same cells where inmates were starting to unravel. Marcus Hale was brought back to crisis observation, this time under full monitoring. He paced relentlessly, eyes darting toward the corners of the room as if something moved there. But when the lights were bright and the microphones hot, he said nothing. The mania wasn't constant, it came in waves, triggered by silence, by stillness, by the faintest creak of the building settling. Dr. Keene wasn't looking for ghosts or legends. She was looking for pressure points. Something had changed in D-tier, something environmental, procedural, or psychological, and it was hitting already unstable minds hard. She reviewed the surveillance audio again. The tapping wasn't random. It was coming through the ventilation system. And it wasn't coming from another cell. It was echoing from a sealed utility shaft. She called facilities. They pulled the original blueprints, some going back decades. That's when she saw it, a narrow inspection corridor behind the cells, long since welded shut, used during the prison's early years before being replaced by newer systems. It was never meant to be accessed again, but ADX was old. Buildings shift, metal loosens, and sound travels in ways it shouldn't. Dr. Keene brought the lieutenant in. That space is causing sensory crossfire, she said. The inmates aren't hearing a person. They're hearing the building. The isolation amplifies it until the mind fills in the rest. He stared at the blueprint. So you're saying the prison itself is breaking them? I'm saying the environment is pushing already fragile men past their threshold. One starts slipping, another hears him, and it spreads. Psychological contagion. ADX is designed to control behavior. But it also creates pressure, and pressure leaks. The lieutenant exhaled through his teeth. He'd seen men break before. But never a whole tier on the same trajectory. Before they could intervene, Marcus's condition worsened. He stopped speaking during evaluations. Stopped eating regularly. He developed a fixation with the walls, pressing his ear against the concrete until the skin bruised. The staff watched the decline unfold with the familiar, helpless frustration of people who knew they couldn't undo what the environment was doing faster. One night, Marcus finally spoke again, softly, suddenly, with chilling clarity. "It's not a person," he whispered. "It's the reminder." Keene asked, "A reminder of what?" "That no one leaves here whole." And that was the core truth ADX never advertised. The prison kept the country safe, but it also produced an invisible casualty list, minds eroded, identities stripped away, human beings reduced to shadows of who they'd once been. There was no memorial for them. No data released to the public. Only patterns, repeating themselves behind sealed doors. Maintenance crews began reinforcing the old shaft, sealing gaps, stabilizing the metal. The tapping faded slowly, then stopped entirely. But the damage was done. The inmates who'd spiraled didn't bounce back just because the sound was gone. Isolation had already carved its channels deep. Marcus was transferred to a psychiatric observation unit, not because he was dangerous, but because ADX had taken more from him than his freedom. Dr. Keene filed her report. It wouldn't change policy. It wouldn't reduce isolation hours. But it documented a truth she'd seen for years. The human mind isn't meant to be locked away in silence. It bends. It fractures. And sometimes, even when the cell door stays closed, something inside slips out. In the end, Marcus Hale didn't need a ghost, a whispering inmate, or a secret figure in the walls. ADX itself was enough to break him. If you think this story was intense, the next one will leave you speechless. Subscribe for more true crime stories that'll keep you on the edge of your seat.